50 meters. That was the distance the general chose because it was supposed to be nothing. A pistol, a paper target, a crowd of officers who already knew how the joke ended. What none of them knew was that the small woman accepting the weapon had spent 9 years learning to make a handgun, do what most men could not make a rifle do, and that in 90 seconds she would put 3 rounds through a hole the size of a coin and change the way every person on that range said her name. She did not smile when she took the pistol. She checked the chamber, felt the trigger's weight, and let the laughter wash over her like weather she had no interest in. She did not yet know that by nightfall the same laughter would be gone from every throat on that firebase. General Dorn meant it kindly, or told himself he did. He was a big man with a voice built for parade grounds, and he had a habit of turning quiet people into props. "Corporal Sabine Okorie," he announced, holding the pistol out flat on his palm like a party favor. "Our newest transfer. Came to us with a marksmanship file so thick I assumed it was a typo." The officers chuckled. Sabine was 5'3" in her boots, narrow through the shoulders, with hands that looked too small for the work. "Show us something, Corporal. 50 meters. Standing, no rest." He said it the way you dare a child to eat something spicy. If you are the kind of person who likes watching someone get underestimated and then dismantle every assumption in the room, stay with me, because this story travels a long way from this dusty range. Subscribe, drop the name of your city in the comments so I know where you're listening from, and stay to the end. There is a moment near the finish, a single shot fired in the dark with lives hanging on it, that people rewind 3 and 4 times to be sure they heard it right. Comment 50 meters if you're here from the start. Rewind 11 months. The firebase sat in a high desert valley where the wind came off the ridgelines in the afternoon and turned the whole world the color of old bone. Dust got into everything: rifles, coffee, the corners of your eyes. It was flat, exposed country, the kind where distance lied to you and heat shimmer made a man at 400 meters swim like something underwater. Sabine had grown up nowhere near a place like this. She learned to shoot in a cramped indoor lane beneath a bowling alley in a gray northern city, taught by a woman named Present Adeyemi. Everyone called her Present, because that was the first word out of her mouth every session, tapped twice against the bench. Present, be here. Present was 41, alive, blunt, and entirely without romance about the craft. She ran a competitive pistol club on almost no money, and she did not believe in the mystical nonsense other coaches sold. "They'll tell you to breathe with the universe," Present told her once, when Sabine was 19 and flinching. "Ignore them. A pistol is a lever and a lie. The lever is physics. The lie is that you can't hold it still. You can, if you stop asking your arm to do your eye's job." She drilled Sabine on one thing above all others: the trigger press so slow and so straight that the shot surprised the shooter every time. If you know when it's going to break, you'll fight it. Don't know, let it steal the shot from you. She made Sabine dry fire 10,000 times with a coin balanced on the front sight, and if the coin fell, they started the count again. Present was not a saint, and she was not dead. She was a difficult, living woman who had once told Sabine her stance was an insult to gravity, and Sabine loved her the way you love the person who refuses to lie to you. The keepsake, if you want to call it that, was not an object. It was a habit Present had beaten into her hands, 2 taps of the index finger, against whatever surface was nearest before a shot that mattered. Present. Be here. Sabine did it without thinking, and no one who saw it ever knew what it meant. She carried a competition pedigree onto that base that nobody bothered to read. 3 national handgun titles under a governing body most soldiers had never heard of. A record for a timed precision string that still stood. But the file said administrative and support transfer. And a woman her size with a soft voice reading a clipboard did not look like a threat to anyone's pride, so the file stayed closed and the assumptions stayed open. The first person to notice was a mechanic named Theo Vandal, a wiry corporal who fixed the base's generators and had a gift for seeing hands. He watched Sabine field strip a borrowed sidearm one evening outside the armory. Not fast exactly, but with no wasted motion at all, every part going down in the order she'd pick it back up. "You've done that a few times," he said. She shrugged. "A few." He didn't understand what he'd seen. He only knew it was different. The way a man who can't read music still knows when a piano is being played by someone who can. He'd remember it later. Her team came together without ceremony. There were 3 of them who ended up mattering. Ilse Baconnard, a sergeant a decade older than Sabine, a rangy woman with a smoker's laugh, who read wind and ground better than anyone on the base, and had long since stopped needing to prove herself to men. Ilse was nobody's junior, and nobody's sidekick. She was Sabine's equal, and she treated the small corporal with the flat respect of a professional who recognizes another. The second was Pax Odom, a young signals specialist who ran the comms net, asked the questions everyone else was thinking, and said out loud the things the rest of them only felt. The third was the one nobody expected to matter, Warrant Officer Bram Achille, the base's ranking marksmanship instructor, who had built his authority on being the best shot on the firebase, and did not intend to share the title with a transfer who came up to his collarbone. Achille was not stupid, and he was not untalented. That was what made him dangerous. He could shoot, and he knew he could shoot, and he'd spent 20 years turning that fact into a personality. When Sabine arrived, he made a project of her. "Careful with the recoil, Corporal," he'd say, loud enough for the range to hear, miming a pistol, kicking a small person over backward. "We'll get you a mounting bracket." He gate-kept the good ammunition, scheduled her range time for the worst wind of the day, and told the newer soldiers, with the warm authority of a man they trusted, that the transfer was a diversity checkbox with a soft grip. The cruelty was always performed. It only worked if people watched. Ilse got her own version of it, in the way men like Achille could not help themselves. He'd waved her off a firing line once in front of a dozen recruits. "Let the men zero first, Sergeant. You can adjust their windage after." As if 2 decades of reading A Valley's Air counted for nothing next to his stance. Ilse had smiled with no warmth at all and walked away, and Sabine had watched her walk and understood that they were going to be friends. The 2 of them found each other over a jammed match-grade barrel one night, both reaching for it at the range's cleaning bench, and spent an hour talking ballistics with the specific joy of 2 people who'd each assumed they were the only one in the building who cared this much. Ilse quizzed her on holdovers. Sabine answered in numbers, fast, without hedging. Ilse leaned back. "Where'd they hide you?" she asked. "Under a bowling alley," Sabine said, and Ilse laughed her smoker's laugh, and that was that. It was the first time on that base Sabine had spoken more than 4 words in a row, which is how the 50-meter joke came to happen, and how General Dorn, meaning it kindly or telling himself he did, handed a competitive pistol champion a handgun in front of 40 officers and dared her to embarrass herself. Sabine took the weapon. She pressed the magazine home, racked the slide, and let the range go quiet. The way ranges do when the joke stops being funny, and nobody yet knows why. 50 meters. Standing, no rest. The paper target hung small and white in the shimmer. She raised the pistol one-handed, then settled into two, her stance so still it looked staged. She tapped her finger twice against the grip. Present. Be here. The first shot broke and surprised even her, which meant it was perfect. She did not chase it with her eyes. She let the sights settle back into the same picture and let the second shot steal itself. Then the third. Dorn walked the 50 meters himself, because he had to. He put his thumb over the group, and his thumb covered all of it. 3 rounds. One ragged hole, no bigger than a coin, punched clean through the paper, at a distance where most of his officers would have been proud to keep 3 rounds on the whole sheet. He stood there a long moment with his back to the crowd. When he turned around, he was not laughing. "Corporal," he said, and his parade ground voice had gone careful. "Where did you learn that?" It was not a question. It was a man rearranging what he thought he knew. She did not answer with a story. She answered with 2 words. Under pressure. Behind him, Bram Achille had stopped smiling. He said nothing, but something had shifted in his face, the specific stillness of a man who has just watched someone do the thing he built his whole self around, and do it better, and not even breathe hard. The crisis came 4 days later, and it did not knock. It arrived as a radio call at 0340, Pax's voice cracking through the dark of the barracks before the alarm even sounded. A supply convoy had been hit on the switchback road 8 kilometers north, in a pass the maps called Coride Gap. 2 vehicles disabled, 1 on fire, the survivors pinned in a rock cut with enemy shooters on the high ground working down through them. The quick reaction force was 40 minutes out. The people in that cut did not have 40 minutes. Dorn stood in the operations tent with a map he already hated and a decision he did not want to make. The only clear line onto the enemy's high ground was a shoulder of rock across the gap, a nasty, exposed perch a marksman could reach in 15 minutes on foot, and the only shooter on the base whose range scores now made him swallow was the transfer he'd handed a pistol as a joke. He looked at Achille. Achille looked at the floor. Everyone in the tent understood the silence. "Get Okori," Dorn said. And then, because it cost him, and he made himself pay it out loud in front of his staff, "I read her file wrong. Go." Sabine was already dressed. She took a rifle now, not a pistol, a match-grade bolt gun from the armory Achille had never let her sign out. And she took Ilse, who knew the gap's wind, and Pax on comms. And they went up the shoulder of rock in the last of the dark, while the fire in the pass threw orange light against the underside of the smoke. She keyed the radio once at the top, flat and low, and the men who'd heard Achilles' jokes about her heard instead a voice with no fear in it at all. "Overwatch set. I have the high ground in view. Talk to me and stay off this net unless you're bleeding." Pax exhaled. "Copy, Overwatch." Down in the operations tent, someone who'd laughed at the mounting bracket joke did not laugh now. Ilse settled beside her, glassing the far slope. Winds quartering off the ridge, left to right, picking up. "Call it a valley that lies. It'll drop dead still in the low ground and slap you in the exposed stretches. 4 shooters I can see. 1 up high in the rocks, 3 working the cut." Sabine found them 1 at a time. The light was bad and getting better. The sun about to crest the eastern wall and pour straight down the gap into her eyes, which gave her a narrow window before the glare took the far slope entirely. "Ranges," she said. Ilse read them off the ground she already knew by heart. 340 to the low pair, 410 to the one behind the boulder. The high one's a problem. 580, tucked, only shows when he leans to shoot. Sabine started with the nearest of the three in the cut, because he was the one about to have a clear shot into the survivors. She pressed the trigger the way Present taught her, slow and straight, and let the shot surprise her. Across the gap, the man simply stopped and folded down out of sight behind the rock. "Hit," Ilse said. "One." The rifle's report rolled down the valley and came back off the far wall a half-second later, a double clap. Sabine was already on the second man, who had turned toward the sound. He dropped. 2. The third had learned. He pulled back into cover and started shooting at the muzzle smoke, rounds cracking off the shoulder of rock, a body length below Sabine's position, close enough that grit stung her cheek. This was the first moment the danger came for her, and not the other way around. She heard the round before she understood it. A flat snap, and then a whine as it skated off stone and away, and a fistful of pulverized rock flung up into her left eye, so that half the world went to stinging blur. Her body wanted to roll away from the edge. She felt the pull of it in every muscle, the animal certainty that the next round was already coming. She kept her cheek on the stock. She blinked the eye clear, one hard blink, and made herself read what the enemy was doing instead of what her fear was screaming. The third shooter had exposed a shoulder and an elbow to reach around his boulder and fire. A hand's width of him, no more, at 410 meters, in rising wind, with one eye watering shut. Ilse said the correction low and even. "Hold a body width right. He's shooting blind." Sabine held off the edge of the rock into empty air, into the wind, and trusted the number. The trigger stole the shot. Across the gap, the elbow and the shoulder disappeared and did not come back. 3, Ilse said quietly. "That was ugly hard. Nice." That left the one on the high ground at 580, and he was the professional. He'd watched 3 of his men die, and he had not fired once, because he understood that muzzle flash and smoke were what got you killed. And he was waiting for Sabine to give him a target. He had the height on her, and the better cover, and the sun was climbing now toward the edge of the eastern wall. Time was against her twice. Once for the survivors bleeding in the cut, once for the glare about to blind her. "Coride, this is Overwatch," she said. 3 enemy down. 1 remaining, high in the rocks, patient. Get your people moving to the vehicles now, while I have him pinned. Go now." In the pass below, the pinned survivors understood they'd been handed a door and started to move. And the high shooter, seeing them break cover, had to make a choice. Take a survivor and reveal himself, or stay hidden and let them go. He chose. He leaned out to shoot into the running men, and for 3/4 of a second, he was a whole man and not a hand's width. Sabine had been waiting on exactly that. She didn't hurry it. She pressed. The shot rolled down the valley, and up on the high rocks the enemy marksman came off his perch and did not shoot anyone. 4, Ilse breathed. "Overwatch is clear. Gap's clean." Pax's voice broke, thin with relief. "Overwatch. Coride element is moving. They're reaching the vehicles. Overwatch. They're up. They're up." For a moment nobody said the thing they were all feeling, which was that a woman, a general, had handed a pistol. As a joke, had just taken 4 professional shooters off a mountain in under 6 minutes and cracked open a kill box that should have swallowed everyone in it. Then the empty channel. Sabine keyed for the survivor's element leader, a name Pax had given her, and got nothing. She called again. Static, and the wind, and the small hiss of a net with no one answering. 3 seconds. 5. In that silence, she felt, for the first time all morning, something cold move through her, because she had cleared the high ground, but she did not know what the high ground had already done. Then a voice, ragged. "Overwatch! We've got wounded. We've got a man down bad. We need hands, not guns." She left Ilse the rifle and went down the shoulder of rock faster than was safe, and Pax came with her, and they crossed into the cut where the survivors were dragging a man out of the shadow of the burning truck. He was older than Sabine expected, gray at the temples, a master sergeant named Osei Kambili, and he was fading. He'd been hit before she ever fired her first shot, in the opening seconds of the ambush, and he'd been bleeding the whole time she was clearing the ridge. Someone had a field dressing pressed to him, and it wasn't holding. Sabine's hands, which 20 minutes earlier had made a bolt gun do impossible things, went to work doing something else entirely. She'd spent 2 years as a competitive club safety officer, running an EMT certification she never mentioned, because on that base it had never once come up. She cut the failing dressing away, found where the bleeding was actually coming from, and packed it hard and right, both hands and all her weight, the same stillness in her, now that had been in her on the trigger. Kambili's eyes found her face. He was gray and going grayer, and he was frightened in the way that even hard men are frightened when the cold starts climbing their legs. "I've got a daughter," he said, the words coming loose and slurred. "She's graduating. 3 weeks. He couldn't finish it. Am I going to see it?" Sabine didn't give him a maybe. She did not give him a doctor's hedge. She held pressure, and she held his eyes, and she said it as a fact, the way Present had taught her to say the only things worth saying. "You're going to be in the 3rd row. You'll embarrass her by crying. Stay with me." He almost laughed. It bought her the seconds she needed. The dust-off came in loud over the eastern wall, and she rode the litter to the bird, with her hands still packed against him, and she did not let go until the flight medic physically took her place. Kambili was still breathing when the helicopter lifted. He would make the 3rd row. He would, in fact, cry. For about 2 hours it was over, and everyone believed it. The convoy survivors were out. The gap was clear, and back on the fire base, men who'd laughed at the mounting bracket joke were saying Okorie's name, the careful way Dorn had said it on the range. That was when the second call came in, and it was worse. Corrie Gap had not been a raid. It had been bait. The convoy carried a piece of hardware the enemy wanted very badly, and when the ambush failed, they went for the fallback. A section of them had peeled off before the QRF arrived and taken the district clinic in the valley town of Sarada, 4 kilometers down the road, an adult facility, staff and patients, no children on the manifest, a fact Dorn confirmed twice because it changed how he could fight. 11 hostages. The enemy's demand came in flat and simple over an open channel, the hardware and safe passage, or they would start at noon and work through the 11-1 an hour. It was 10:40. There was a complication that made every conventional option a coffin. The lead vehicle the enemy had driven into Sarada and rigged was parked hard against the clinic's load-bearing corner, packed with enough explosive to drop the whole west wing. A man sat in the driver's seat with a dead man's switch, a wire running from his hand to the charge, and he'd promised to close his fist if any force came within sight of the building. Snipers couldn't take him. The windshield was angled armored glass, rated to turn a rifle round, and even a clean head shot risked a dying hand clenching on the switch. Assault was suicide. Negotiators had nothing to trade that Dorn was allowed to give, and the clock was grinding toward noon. Sabine went with the command element to a rooftop 300 meters out, and Ilsa and Pax came, and so did Bram Akillo, because he was the base marksmanship authority, and Dorn wanted every eye. They studied the vehicle through spotting scopes for 40 minutes, and every solution died on contact. The armored glass turned any shot at the driver. The dead man's switch turned any shot that didn't kill him instantly into the thing that dropped the wall. Achille, to his credit, said the true thing. There's no shot. The glass'll deflect anything we send at his head, and if we don't drop him instant, he closes his hand. There's no shot. It was Ilsa who found the key, and she found it by refusing to look at the man and looking at the machine instead. She'd been glassing the vehicle for half an hour, and she went still. The switch isn't the problem, she said slowly. The hand is, and the hand runs on a heart. She laid it out. The dead man's switch was a spring clip. The man had to hold it closed. A wound wouldn't stop a dying reflex. A clench was a clench. But there was a second wire, a jumper he'd run from the switch to a small black box zip-tied to the vehicle's frame outside the armored cab, because a single dead man's switch is unreliable, and men who rig these things run a relay to be sure. The relay box was the real trigger. The man's hand only armed it, and the relay box, she could see it, low on the frame rail, just forward of the rear wheel, sat in the open, unarmored, no glass between it and the rooftop. You don't shoot the man, Ilsa said. You shoot the box. You cut the relay before you ever touch him. Kill the relay, and his hand does nothing. But the relay box was the size of a pack of cards, canted at an angle, and there was a wire running into it that was the actual firing line. Sever the wire clean at the box, and the circuit opened safe. Hit the box body wrong, and nobody on that roof could swear it wouldn't complete the circuit on the way through. The target was not the box. It was the wire. At the point it entered the box. A black cord, no thicker than a pencil, 310 meters away, in a shadow under the vehicle's frame, in the noon glare coming up off the valley floor. And it would not stay in shadow. In minutes, the sun would climb past the frame rail and put that wire in direct glare where Sabine couldn't even see it. She had a window, and the window was closing, and this time it was not the wind that set the clock. It was the light and the enemy's own noon deadline running down together. The call had to come from Dorn, but the request that mattered had to come from Achille, because he was the one who'd said there was no shot, and everyone on that roof knew it. He stood at the parapet a long moment with the spotting scope, and the silence stretched. 4 seconds, 5, 6, while the man who had built his entire self on being the best shooter on the firebase understood exactly what he was about to do. Then he lowered the scope and turned to her. It cost him. You could see it cost him in the set of his jaw and the flat effort it took to make his mouth form the words in front of the command element, and Ilsa, and Pax, and the general. "Corporal Okori," he said. His voice had lost every ounce of the parade ground swagger. "There are 11 people in that building. I can't make this shot. I don't know anyone who can. But I watched you put 3 rounds in one hole, and if there's a person alive who can cut that wire, it's you." He swallowed. "I'm asking you. Please, take the shot. I can't." Nobody on the roof said a word. Pax had gone still. Even the general was watching Achille, not Sabine. It was the sound of a man setting down something he'd carried for 20 years because 11 strangers mattered more than his pride. Sabine looked at him for 1 second, Then she moved to the parapet and lay down behind the rifle without a word, because there was nothing to say that mattered more than what her hands were about to do. She built the shot the way Present built everything. From the ground up, no romance in it. 310 meters. She dialed the elevation off Ilsa's red. The wire entered the relay box at a shallow angle. She needed to strike it at the entry point so the box body took nothing, a target maybe 2 centimeters of visible cord in a well of shadow. The glare was crawling up the frame rail. Ilsa lay beside her, not calling wind now. There was almost none at this range. That wasn't the problem. But watching the shadow line and the light. You've got, maybe 90 seconds of shade on that wire, Ilsa said. Then the sun's on it, and you're shooting a black cord against a black box in white glare. It's now, or it's not at all. Down in the vehicle, the driver shifted, and everyone's breath stopped, and he settled again. The dead man's switch stayed closed in his fist. Sabine tapped her finger twice against the rifle's stock. Present. Be here. She let her breathing go long and slow and empty. She found the wire in the scope, a thread of shadow inside shadow, and she put the reticle on the exact point where it disappeared into the box. She was not thinking about the 11 people. She was not thinking about Achille. She was thinking about a coin balanced on a front sight in a room under a bowling alley, and a woman tapping the bench twice, and the one thing she'd been taught above all others: do not know when it breaks. Let it steal the shot. She pressed the trigger so slowly that the world narrowed to the single black thread, and the wind held its breath, and the shadow held, and the shot surprised her. For a full second, nothing seemed to happen. The rifle came down out of recoil. The wire was gone, severed clean at the box, the 2 ends hanging free. And the man in the driver's seat, feeling nothing, knowing nothing, sat with his fist still closed on a switch that now armed a circuit that ended in open air. His hand meant nothing anymore. The assault team took him through the doors 90 seconds later, and he closed his fist as they did. A reflex, a dying man's clench, on a dead line, and the west wing of the clinic did not move. And 11 people walked out into the noon light who were supposed to be dead by 1 o'clock. Cut, Ilsa said, and her voice cracked on the single word. Overwatch. The wire is cut. It's cut. They're clear. They said it was a lie before the sun went down. The report went up the chain, and someone 2 echelons, removed, wrote in the margin that a 300-meter shot severing a specific wire at a relay box, first round, under a closing light window, was not credible, and the corporal had likely gotten lucky, hitting the box, and the relay had simply failed. Achille heard about the margin note, and this time the man who'd once gate-kept her ammunition did something with his rank. He pulled the recovered relay box from evidence, the whole assembly the disposal team had made safe, and he brought in the 2 enemy technology specialists who'd defused it, and he laid the physical thing on the table in front of the officers who'd written, "Not credible." The box was intact, unmarked. The wire, though, the wire was severed clean through at the entry point. A single strike, the cut face of it bright and square. No tearing, no second impact anywhere on the box or the frame. One of the diffusal specialists, who had no reason to flatter anyone, put it flatly. A round that cut that wire that clean, at that angle, without touching the box a centimeter to either side, was placed there on purpose by someone who was aiming at the wire and nothing else. "You don't luck into this," he said, turning the box in the light. "This is the single finest piece of shooting I have ever physically held in my hands." The margin note was struck. The word "not credible" came off her file for good. The running count from the gap settled when the after-action was done, at a whole number that no one on the base said lightly again. 4 enemy shooters off the high ground in under 6 minutes, from an exposed perch with grit in her eye and a wounded man bleeding below her the whole time. 4. And then, in Sarada, no count at all. A single round that killed no one and saved 11, which was, Present would have said, the entire point of learning to shoot in the first place. You learn the lever and the lie so that on the one day it matters, you can choose exactly where the shot goes, down to a wire in a shadow, and take nothing you don't mean to take. Precision was never about violence. It was about being able to promise where a thing would land and keep the promise. That evening, Bram Achille came to find her at the range, where she was cleaning the bolt gun alone in the last light. He stood at the edge of the lane for a while before he could make himself walk over. When he did, the words came hard, halting, starting and stopping. A man dismantling something in himself in real time. "I have to say a thing," he began, and stopped. He looked at the rifle in her hands instead of her face. "I built everything on being the best shot here. Everything. And when you walked in, small and quiet with that file, I made you into a joke so I wouldn't have to find out you were better." He stopped again. His jaw worked. "That's the truth of it. It wasn't the recoil or the grip. It was that I was afraid. And I made everyone laugh at you so I wouldn't have to look at it." He finally raised his eyes to her. 11 people are alive because you can do a thing I told a general couldn't be done. I'm sorry. Not for being wrong. For being cruel about it. On purpose. For months. Because I was scared of a corporal a foot shorter than me. His voice was almost gone. That's all. That's the whole of it." Sabine set the bolt down. She looked at him for a moment, and there was no triumph in her face. None at all. "Took guts," she said. 2 words. Then, after a beat, because it was true, and because Present had taught her the only things worth saying are the true ones, "We're square." Dorn made it official the next week, and he did not make a speech of it because he'd learned something about her that a speech would have insulted. He gave her her own Overwatch element, 3 shooters of her choosing to train, and a permanent posting she could have refused and didn't. "I handed you a pistol as a joke," he said, and that was as close to an apology as a general like Dorn came. "Train them like you were trained." She took Ilsa first. Ilsa said yes before the sentence was finished. Theo Vandal, the mechanic who'd watched her strip a sidearm and known without knowing, found her at the mess a few days after. He wasn't a talker, and he didn't try to be. He just stopped by her table, turning his cap in his hands. "The master sergeant from the Gap," he said. "Kambili. His daughter graduated Tuesday. His wife sent a photo to half the base." Theo swallowed. "He's in the 3rd row, crying." He set the printed photo on her table and didn't wait for a reply, because there wasn't one big enough, and they both knew it. Sabine looked at the picture of a gray-templed man weeping in a folding chair beside a young woman in a cap and gown, and something in her chest that she never let anyone see moved once and settled. The last of the light went gold across the valley. Sabine walked the empty range alone, the way she did every evening, checking the lanes, her boots quiet in the dust. She stopped at the 50-meter line, where it had all started, where a general had handed her a pistol, expecting a punchline. She stood there a moment, level-eyed, breathing slow, entirely at peace in the exposed and lying country that had tried its best to underestimate her and failed. Somewhere far from there, in an after-action review, 2 echelons up, the officer who'd written "not credible" was quietly reassigned. His certainty about what was and wasn't possible collapsed to nothing by a bright square cut in a black wire he could not explain. Sabine tapped her finger twice against the wooden post at the 50-meter line. Present. Be here. She was. She always had been. It had only ever been a question of who was paying attention.